We have demonstrated that the temple of God in the prophecy of 2 Thessalonians 2:4 is certainly not a Jewish temple or a rebuilt temple of Jerusalem because, among many other reasons, that would not be the temple of God at all. We have brought forward the overwhelming evidence that the temple of God in the prophecy of St. Paul is St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. We have also shown that there is a direct equation between St. Peter's Basilica, which was built on the very spot of St. Peter's grave, and the exact location of New Testament Babylon according to Scripture. St. Peter's Basilica is literally St. Peter's Church and the place where St. Peter is, which is precisely how 1 Peter 5:13 defines the location of Babylon. That's why prophecies about Babylon, including every single word of the prophecy of Revelation 18:2, have been fulfilled with precision at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, the precise location of Babylon. That means that St. Peter's Basilica is both the location of the end times temple of God and the location of end times Babylon. Now, as a further confirmation of this point, consider this. The first temple of God, Solomon's temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC in punishment for the sins and faithlessness of the Old Testament people. It was rebuilt, and the second temple, renovated by Herod I, became known as the Temple of Herod. The Temple of Herod was completely destroyed by the Romans in AD 70 following the Jews' rejection of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, true God and true man, and in direct fulfillment of his prophecies. So, there's a pattern here. The first temple of God was destroyed on account of the sins and bad will of the people. The second temple of God was destroyed, definitively ending Judaism, on account of the sins and bad will of the people. Significantly, the destruction of both temples was also foretold in the words of sacred Scripture. It makes sense, therefore, that the physical temple of God in the end times and the Christian period will also be destroyed, and that the destruction of the place where it is will be foretold in the words of sacred Scripture. Herein we come across another major clue about the location of the apocalyptic end times temple of God. Remember, we've shown that St. Peter's Basilica equals the temple of God. The universal church was built upon St. Peter, the church is the new temple, therefore the temple of God will be built upon St. Peter, as St. Peter's Basilica was. Pope Pius XI officially called St. Peter's Basilica the most ample temple. St. Peter's Basilica, built over the leader of the Universal Church, is the most prominent structure in the Universal Christian Church, and the end times temple of God must and does refer to a structure that is the property of the Church of Christ, the Catholic Church. Non-Catholics who claim to be Christian have no physical structure that could possibly be considered the temple of God, because only true Catholicism is Christianity, with a universal temple and a universal reach. St. Peter's Basilica is also a building of such size and grandeur that it compares worthily in that regard to the Old Testament temples, and therefore it was fittingly described by St. Paul as the temple of the God. The apocalyptic prophecies have been fulfilled with specificity there, and more. St. Peter's Basilica is the location of the temple of God, and St. Peter's Basilica is also the location of Babylon, because according to the inspired words of 1 Peter 5:13, St. Peter's Church and the place where St. Peter is the location of Babylon. That means that the temple of God equals the location of Babylon. Let me repeat that. The temple of God equals the location of Babylon. Now, if the end times temple of God equals the location of New Testament end times Babylon, as we are saying, and the first two temples of God were destroyed, and Scripture specifically prophesied that they would be destroyed, it makes sense that Scripture would also specifically prophesy, in New Testament end times prophecies, that Babylon will be destroyed. Well, what do you know? In Revelation 18:21 we read this, quote, "Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, So will Babylon the great city be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more." End quote. This is another striking clue and piece of evidence that Babylon, the place where St. Peter is, St. Peter's Basilica, is the location of the temple of God in the Christian period and the end times, exactly as we've been saying. In fact, in Matthew 23:38, when Jesus describes the judgment upon Jerusalem, the place where the temple that would be destroyed was located, he says this, quote, "Behold, your house is being left to you desolate." End quote. The word used for desolate in the Greek of this verse is eremos. A verbal form of the exact same word is used in Revelation 18:17 to describe the destruction of Babylon. Quote, "For in a single hour all this wealth has been desolated, eremothe." End quote. This is another way that God has indicated that Babylon, the place where St. Peter is, St. Peter's Basilica, is the location of the end times temple of God, just as we have been saying. Indeed, the very same word in a noun form is also used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, in Jeremiah 7:34 and Jeremiah 22:5, which prophesied the destruction of the first temple, the Temple of Solomon, and the surrounding area, a Ramosin. Babylon's destruction is specifically mentioned and foretold in sacred scripture, and described in the aforementioned manner, precisely because the place where St. Peter is, Babylon, is also the place where the temple of God is. The apocalyptic prophecies about the Whore of Babylon deal with the takeover of that temple of God and the Vatican by heretical antipopes during the Great Apostasy. Also notice the reference to the destruction of the wealth in this verse, which fittingly describes the artistic and other wealth in St. Peter's Basilica. Now, at this point we should refute an objection. Despite the overwhelming and stunning evidence that Babylon's location equals St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican, and Rome in the end times, some people get confused on this issue. They object by arguing that Vatican City or Rome cannot be Babylon the Great City because the apocalypse refers to shipmasters, seafaring men, sailors, and those whose trade is on the sea, when it describes those who lament Babylon's destruction. Therefore, according to them, Babylon the Great City must be a major port city. This objection is refuted, however, by Revelation 17:15. In describing the harlot of Babylon, Revelation 17:15, which obviously comes before Revelation 18, already told us that the waters where the harlot is sitting are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. The apocalypse therefore directly informs us that the waters on which the Whore of Babylon sits are not literal waters. Rather, they represent and symbolize the peoples and nations over which Babylon is presiding during the end times apostasy. This is similar to how Jesus Christ told his apostles that he would make them fishers of men, Matthew 4:19, Mark 1:17. The apostles worked among the peoples and nations to convert them to Christ. This is described metaphorically as fishing or working in the waters. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus also says, quote, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the world. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." End quote. Revelation 17:15's statement about what the waters symbolize and represent is, among other things, what those who advance the aforementioned objection fail to see. By usurping the temple of God in Vatican City and the physical structures of the true church during the Great Apostasy, the harlot has taken control of the symbolic waters, of the peoples and nations that follow Rome and the Vatican. She has assumed control over the peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues that previously followed the Catholic Church on every continent and led them astray, even though a remnant of true traditional Catholics, which represents the true Catholic Church, remains. Thus, those who work in the sea, the shipmasters, sailors, etc., are not literal sailors, but people who work with or lead segments of the peoples and multitudes under the control of end times Babylon, and therefore lament its destruction. Babylon the Great City is St. Peter's Basilica, the Vatican, and Rome during the end times, as overwhelming evidence and the clear fulfillment of many prophecies shows. Further, in Revelation chapter 18, we have 5 different references to Babylon as, quote, the Great City. Babylon is called the Great City, the Great City, the Great City. City is part of Babylon's title. The reason we see this repetition of the term city when Apocalypse 18 refers to Babylon is that the prophecy is talking about Vatican City. Notice that city is in the official title of the Vatican City state. Scripture repeatedly calls it Babylon the Great City because it's referring to the Vatican City state, aka Vatican City. The Vatican City-state had 7 Roman kings who fulfilled the apocalyptic prophecies about the 7 Roman kings, as our material explains. Vatican City eventually gave rise to the Whore of Babylon under the Vatican II sect, just as the Great City is connected to the end times Whore of Babylon and the 7 Roman kings. St. Peter's Basilica, the location of Babylon and the Temple of God, exists within Vatican City. Babylon, the Great City, refers most specifically to the place where St. Peter is and St. Peter's Church, Vatican City. Hence, as we continue to explain this truth about the Temple of God, people need to recognize the direct connection between the precise location of Babylon, that is, the place where St. Peter is, the precise location of the Temple of God, and the seat of authority for the end times beast. They converge at the very spot where the prime apostle and leader of the church, St. Peter, was buried. For it is from that place that the true church has wielded authority over the nations. When the Temple of God, Vatican City, and the physical structures of the true church were overtaken by apostate usurping antipopes during the prophesied apostasy, the nations were led astray. This video is one section of our presentation on the Temple of God in Prophecy. Please consult the previous video, The Temple of God in Prophecy is Not Jewish, and stay tuned for future videos. We also recommend our related videos on prophecy and the apocalypse, such as, among other things, the Antichrist Identified. The Antichrist Identified covers in detail the other part of 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-4, about the man of sin who reclined across from and raised himself above everything that is called God or every object of worship at the signature event of the prophesied apostasy.